Steve and friends. Today's special guest, co-author of Rebels at Work and former CIA employee, Carmen Medina. This should be an easy episode for you.
Four times evaluation of the output at the same time. And that applies fairly consistently regardless of which country you look at. Different countries have different ratios. The average tends to be about 3. But if you look at the capital stock and divide it by 3, in most countries, exactly what the output is. Bit of the expression that ties put together there. That. Okay, the dog is gone. Okay.
I'm gonna mute.
So what we have first of all is saying, you better with the dog barking like that in the background. You better. Okay. So, and I can call this backslash. I've just dropped my mouse, and my batteries have dropped out. I'm sure, so I'm going to be in great trouble. Putting it back together again. Hang on.
We are doing very well in today's show.
Are we? I just dropped the battery on the floor, mate. Bloody hell. My keyboard, damn it, my keyboard, the bloody thing has I'm on my floor looking for the parts of my mouse that have fallen on the fucking, oh dear, so I've got to find a battery on the floor. Damn. Hang on.
Oh, I'm not going to live that down, am I?
Oh goodness! I want to welcome everybody to another episode of Steve and Friends. I'm really excited about today's episode. We've got Carmen Medina, and of course we've got Steve Keynes. So I think we're all friends here. But the introduction between Carmen and Steve is happening live, and I couldn't be happier to bring that up. You know. On the introduction, I really enjoyed that, Steve, and I think that was the first time that you saw it. I have to give a shout out to the producer of that, and that's Tyrone. That's Tyrone Keynes. He did a wonderful job.
He's having too much fun here. This is getting seriously getting too much fun, which is great.
Yeah, like I could see Steve in the thumbnail to the left, backstage, and the reactions and laughing. It was great. But Carmen, just to give you a heads up, you probably pieced together in kind of a bit of a gestalt fashion that there was some screw ups or some highlight reel of some madness going on. And actually, that's exactly what happened last week. You know, if something could go wrong, it went wrong. And
first of all, Ty was trying to show his screen while I was talking, and then he couldn't get his. I don't know what was going on with his screen, but he couldn't get his model to work properly or turn up on the right screen. So I took over in the middle of it. My mouse, which it's actually I rather like it. It's a Microsoft mouse, but what the hassle with it is, it was right near my desk. It fell off the edge because my microphone cable was getting in the way. The cover comes off and the batteries dropped out.
I hate when that happens.
It was amusing, give it that much. I managed to finish the model anyway. Finally, I finally found the missing battery.
No, we're good.
Yeah, I found the missing battery, and we finally got it finished. But it was a bit chaotic. So let's have over to you. I mean, I'm delighted to meet you and reading your profile as well. So what's a nonconformist do inside the CIA?
Oh, well, a nonconformist, like a nonconformist in any organization, is trying to advance new ideas that at worst are neutral ideas probably, but obviously they're being advanced because we think they're better ideas, trying to advance these ideas in an organization that's allergic to them.
Yeah.
Sometimes immune, just cannot accept them. And when we talk about rebels at work, there's several distinctions to be made here. You're not a rebel at work because you think you're the smartest person in the room. That's actually a poor prescription for a rebel at work.
That'd make Larry Summers a rebel, which doesn't really compute.
And so you're a rebel at work because you've proposed, and this will happen to everyone, I think, in their career. They'll propose a new idea to an organization, which they think is a good idea, and they realize the organization hates it. Instantly. If after that initial reaction, you persevere and you continue trying to make the organization move in a better direction, that's when you become a rebel at work. And it's a very difficult place for most people. When we wrote the book, Lois Kelly and I, in almost 10 years ago, it was published in 2014. We wrote it in 2013. There weren't a lot of people who were talking about how do you help people in a job advance new ideas. It just wasn't a common topic. Most business books are written for managers. There are precious few business books written for the average employee. And people said, you're crazy. Nobody's going to want to read a book about being a rebel at work. And here we are almost 10 years later, and there's several books now have come out along this idea of a rebel leader, nonconformist. And I think and certainly with the way work is changing now, it's become, I don't think it's quite a mainstream idea, but there's a lot of more people thinking about it and trying to figure out how to make change happen in very stodgy organizations.
Without getting sacked in the process.
That's it. And where the psychological and emotional conflict occurs is that a lot of the people who have these ideas are really good employees. And so they're used to advancing quickly and being accepted and, making a difference. And all of a sudden they have this idea where that's non-orthodox, counter to the prevailing orthodoxy of the organization. This happens a lot. And now they're being punished for trying to bring their best self to work. So.
Well, Steve, I think
Steve may be a little frozen there.
Well, he's probably in awe because you're describing certain buzzwords from Steve that he's, I guess, had to just out of no choice of his own, he's had to embody. I mean, he's been up against the machine, so to speak. So, Steve, are you there? Do you have or is his signal drop?
I had something. We went back again. I can see that I'm moving. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Good. Okay. Yeah. I mean, that's been my entire career, frankly. I've been an iconoclast in every organization I've been in, and I get used to being the person saying the uncomfortable things. And the question is, how do you get the organization itself to embrace those unconventional things? So, Carmen, what was your initial unconventional thought that made you a
mine was a huge one. Mine was in the 1990s. With the dawn of the internet and the digital age, I became convinced that the internet was going to change everything for knowledge organizations. I was 100% on it. And I started saying at the CIA that we need to start because we were very much like a classified newspaper in the way we supported policymakers. And I said, we're going to have to do things quite differently in the future, and we're going to start having to make adjustments. And so if you recall, let's say 1995, the internet was all about transparency and open information and kumbaya. And the CIA, what's the CIA about? None of that. Even at its best moments, it's not about that. And it's sort of prevailing orthodoxy was the world is full of enemies. They're keeping things from us. We have to keep secret what we know. Most people can't be trusted to handle classified information. And the digital revolution is made by the devil. That was the first and in many ways, all my subsequent ideas were indents under that big idea that we have to somehow adjust to the digital revolution. And I will just say, while I have the floor, so to speak, that most organizations, many businesses have failed to adjust to the world that's being created by the digital revolution. And they bear part of the blame for the issues such as disinformation or conspiracy theories, because outside of large organizations, information is flowing very quickly in unfiltered, non-hierarchical ways. And yet, particularly the government insists on trying to communicate with the citizens in very old-fashioned ways that just don't keep up with what's going on. So that's definitely something that I've been an advocate of for some time.
So let me ask Carmen, what would you suggest they do as an organization? I mean, I'm sure there's going to be a big leap to having an organization like the CIA jump onto Twitter and embrace
But they have.
Interesting.
And now, I retired 12 years ago, so there you have it. It's been a long time. But how would you do it? Or what do I think organizations should do? Well, I think they need to modernize their communication strategy. So one of it is to learn to be on the platforms and learn to interact on the platforms in a way that makes sense. So the CIA has wandered onto Twitter, and they're sort of have had their interesting moments on Twitter. But a lot of other statements by large organizations on social media or ways of communicating on platforms have been sort of to just cut and paste what they would have done with a PR spokesman and put it on the platform. And that just doesn't work. It doesn't have the informality. It doesn't have the immediacy. It doesn't have the genuineness that people in social media platforms are expecting. So that's an example, I think, of the kind of things they should do. I'll give you a specific example. When the blue check mark issue occurred on Twitter and people started imitating large companies, somebody apparently imitated Chiquita Banana, or whatever the parent company is of Chiquita Banana, and accused it. I never saw the tweet, accused it of launching a coup. And the Chiquita Banana Twitter person came on and said, "We're Chiquita Banana, and we just want you to know that we have not overthrown a government since 1954. Now that was kind of funny, right? That was funny. It was
that's
clever.
That's referring to Cuba.
Yeah, it was not
Yeah.
officious, right? And you know, I think, you know, if I were to put it into a soundbite, I think that large organizations were used to being officious, and
Yeah.
now they have to learn to be informal but still authoritative. Or authoritative may be not quite the right word, but they have to figure that out. And I think that's where the failure has occurred, I believe.
Yeah, the similar experience I've had with a much less significant organisation, the Australian Electoral Commission. And like Australia's elections are far better managed than the American ones. Bureaucrats, on the basis of laws, decide what the distribution of seats is. So you don't have politicians gerrymandering the electorates to make sure they get re-elected. The votes are counted by the bureaucracy, and they're very, very formal, and you'd imagine therefore a very, very officious organisation. But they engaged with Twitter just this last election in Australia, and they were hilarious. And they got across their objectives of the organisation extremely well as well. But they would be quite lighthearted in how they'd interact with people.
Right.
And that's a big change of how bureaucracies normally interact.
Right.
Well, I'll bring up another question here, and I'm curious for my own sake about bridging together two words, and and their professions, right? So on one side we've got analyst, and then the other side we've got economist. And I'm gonna give the question to Steve first, and then I'm gonna give it ask Carmen to answer. How do you think the two work together? How do they work well together? And what I'm referring to is an analyst and an economist, and in individually and in groups. So, Steve, what do you think the role of an analyst is, and how would an economist actually work with an analyst?
Well, I mean, when you've got people working as analysts in the CIA, they're fundamentally doing political thinking. And frankly, I've got to say that I'm a huge critic of America's secret services, the CIA in particular, but also the FBI. The sort of mindset that Carmen's talking about, where they have a very set perspective. I see the CIA in attempting to defend America's interests more often than not screwing those interests up by turning what could have been an ally into an enemy. And one of the little lines I've used with friends frequently is, if you want to know who America's current enemy is, check who their previous friend was. And they'll do something which, like your example about Cuba is a very, very funny one. But of course, the coup that overthrew the democratically elected government of Iran led to the installing the Shah, gave us the Ayatollah and the chaos there. My feeling always was, keep out of it. Sit back and let a theocracy run the country for 10 or 20 years, and the locals will be up in arms at some point, and that will bring it undone. If you try to intervene, you'll end up strengthening the theocracy rather than strengthening the protests against them. I think that pretty much happened, and the big change, of course, this year was when the theocracy killed a young woman because she wasn't wearing a hijab. Then there's this protest across the entire country, and you can rely on an internal dynamic. So my thought about an iconoclastic position inside the CIA would say, don't intervene. Sit back and let the internal dynamics work its way through. Now, how would an idea like that go down inside the CIA?
Well, I mean, I think that it would be received with, it would be considered. So I think there are a lot of misconceptions out there about the CIA. And I don't have time to get into them, but certainly there would be, in country X, is the right policy to try to intervene in some way, either through diplomacy. I mean, not all interventions are kinetic in nature, right? Or is the right thing to let the situation evolve naturally, because it's probably going to evolve naturally in a way that will not be detrimental to U.S. interests. That would be the debate. And the US does not have the resources, nor does any country have the resources, even if it worked, which generally it doesn't, to go around and try to fix other situations in the world. I think that would be one of the misconceptions that people have. So there.
Of course, you would say maybe that with any organization, you'd see that the dirty laundry is aired, right? So could you give an example of and just some things that come to mind that have been really of benefit to the work that the CIA has done? Could you maybe respond with something that you would think that wasn't a scandal, right? So I mean, there's got to be a lot of good work. So could you think of a couple of examples to offer in counterpoint?
I'll give you several examples. So a lot of the technologies that have been developed over the years for gathering information have been adopted for civilian purposes as well. I'd have to Google it to get the details, but a lot of the beginnings of scanning methods that are used, for example, in medicine, were things that were first developed for military or intelligence purposes. Similarly, a lot of information that we now understand and the ability to measure things like climate change are due to the fact that, since the 1960s, and in fact, earlier than that, 1950s, we were taking films, continuously images of all sorts of parts of the world. And because those images existed, now we can make definitive comparisons and sort of measure the loss of glaciers and snow caps, et cetera. From a direct point of view, I can point to what happened during the Ukraine war, because this is common knowledge that the CIA analysts and other analysts in the US government warned correctly about the likelihood of a Russian invasion into Ukraine. And that warning gave people time to prepare themselves for, what would happen when the invasion occurred. So, I mean, that's just known to be out there. I mean, that was what happened.
And that is actually intelligence gathering, rather than trying to manipulate systems. It's saying what is actually happening. And like, I must admit, I was one of the people who was surprised by the war starting, because my expectation was that if, I understood the perspective of the Russians, that and NATO had been trying to undermine Russia when Russia was no longer the Soviet Union. So the whole history of installing Yeltsin, the ineffective transition from socialism to capitalism, and Jeffrey Sachs and I got involved in an argument once. Actually, it was quite fascinating. I've read Sachs's work on Russia and the transition, and I was highly critical of it. He was one of the people who said in his academic papers that you should make an instant transition from socialism to capitalism. And I just thought that's impossible. You cannot do it. One particular writer made a comment about maybe we should simply, on one day, declare all prices deregulated so the market can reach equilibrium instantly. And my response was, what market? The entire structure of a market simply wasn't there. And so the idea of a rapid transition would cause a chaotic breakdown in Russia, which is precisely what happened. Now, and what Sachs found, which is quite fascinating, he went in because he was so pro this rapid transition, that fitted in with the Reagan administration's attitudes, and even Clinton in some ways. And he got inside the State Department. He said he found when he was in the State Department, people couldn't give a shit about the principle of the transition. They wanted to destroy their rival. And they saw the breakdown as being exactly what they wished to achieve. And of course, that's a huge part of the animosity that Russians have towards Americans, and justifiably so. But my feeling was that what would happen is that with this Ukraine war, that Putin would make an invasion in the Donbass region. and basically say you can't have a NATO partner on the border of Russia, so get out, and then you would have had negotiations to make sure Ukraine didn't join NATO. Instead, the whole scale invasion took me completely by surprise, and I've given up thinking about it in terms of America versus Russia. To me, it was almost a form of 19th century imperialism. And on that front, from what I've seen, it does seem the CIA was correct. They got it right that was what Putin intended doing. And now we've got this quagmire, which has been going on now for almost, must be 9 months. It'll be up to a year in February or March.
That's right.
So,
yeah, I was going to ask you, Carmen. We've had a lot of time to. We had 5 or 6 episodes together and spent over an hour on each of those episodes, and so we've got to know each other's story quite well. I remember in your position as an analyst, I was curious, and I'm hoping you can explain for the audience what and how you approach just as a leader within an organization, looking at populations, right? So when you were an analyst with the CIA, did you how would you describe your own version of intelligence gathering? I mean, and not just intelligence gathering, but how you derive and how you draw conclusions from that. I think you, if I'm leading the answer a little bit here, I think you actually gained a reputation for looking beyond the numbers and drawing insights that were valuable, more so than just from numbers on a spreadsheet sort of thing. Can you elaborate a little bit about how you derive information and intelligence from populations specifically?
Well, I want to clear what people think of intelligence. So I prefer the phrase sense making, because that's what we all are in the business of doing. Every one of us is in the business of making sense of their world. And there's lots of information out there, information, not necessarily secret intelligence, information that is available to everyone if they choose to look at it, that will help them make sense of the world. And I think what I, in particular, did more than other people did was that I paid attention to the smaller things. I paid attention to non-obvious indicators of change or momentum. I was highly influenced by my understanding of complexity theory, which developed in the 1990s. And as a result, I understood that societies, I became convinced, and I think it's generally true, that societies often change below the surface in ways that are not immediately apparent. And that when a certain amount of momentum occurs, that change will appear as a surprise, but inevitably, when there's a postmortem done on the surprise, people go back and can see after the fact the indicators that they should have been able to realize in real time. And so my kind of whole goal is to realize those indicators in real time. So I spent a lot of time and interest in in what the popular culture was like, what art in a particular country was like, what their movies were like, how they portrayed themselves, because that to me was an indicator of what was really going on in a society. And I think the big issue in the world, and this circles us back to where we began, big issue in the world right now, if I can be allowed such a gross overstatement, is whether or not it is still an elite-driven world or whether it's becoming much more of a bottom-up world. What really matters to the fate of America or to any country or to any individual What really matters the decisions made in back rooms by, variously corrupt individuals or ineffective governments? Is that what really matters? Or does what really matter social movements, phenomenon such as climate change, the diffusion of information on the world stage? Now, the answer, of course, is both matter in varying degrees in varying situations. But if your focus is just on what governments and elites do, you're going to miss what's going on at the ground level of societies. And I do believe that the story of the 20th century and the early 21st century is that the bottom up has become increasingly more important. And that's just a very interesting thing, and in some ways runs counter to the governing, well, in many ways runs counter to the governing philosophies of many countries.
Yeah. I find it amusing watching how many people are saying the elite was in control of what happened with COVID. I think the elite was out of control with what happened with COVID. It was the greatest disaster you could ever imagine, though I'm sure we'll have worse ones with climate change coming our way. But the idea that the elite was in control there was a joke.
I had a great conversation just when COVID began with someone I knew who had responsibility for issues such as COVID. And they had actually done a simulation, a war game, so to speak, of a pandemic breaking out. And so I asked this person, well, what happened? And they said, well, we had all these roles for all these different individuals, actors in the simulation, but there was one actor we did not simulate, and it was the common citizen, the average Joe Blow and Jane Doe. And I just thought that was so fascinating, kind of classic, very sad, and indicative of this problem that organizations are having of making this adjustment in their way they think about the world so that they also give enough credibility to things that are not elite controlled.
Yeah. And then you get the total quagmire that came out of it, and the interactions have been so appallingly bad that I can't see us handling any other pandemic, which will almost certainly come our way. Probably worse than we came to COVID. We did such a total stuff up there with the whole idea of lockdowns, which is it's an epidemiological technique to isolate and slow transmissions. It's been put across as an attempt by the elites to put microchips inside your bloodstream and other madness like that, and handled so badly that most countries are completely resistant at the level of the public citizen now to any idea of lockdowns or even masking. And,
right. Yeah. Sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you.
Oh, that's okay. Yeah.
I think it was handled poorly, or certainly not in an optimum way by almost everyone. So, science is not the truth. Science is the search for truth. That's what the scientific method is about. And scientists often rethink their hypothesis when new information comes out. But during COVID, we had this, unfortunate thing where the scientists would say one thing, and this happened several times. The medical profession would say one thing, and then they would have to revisit that and say something else. And all of that created, understandably, distrust and confusion in publics. And you're right, Steve. It's a very good example of this dynamic that organizations are facing now and are not adjusting to it particularly well.
Yeah, I mean, if I can jump in here, I would say I'd like to spend a little bit more time on this quantification or description of the organic element within society. I think this is absolutely brilliant. And when you mentioned it, Carmen, it actually resonated. It strongly resonated with myself. Whatever intuition starts to alert around that concept. Steve, I'm going to ask you, how would you model something like that? Like, I mean, I'm really throwing you on the spot, but this is a function of what economists do. Is they model large populations and they describe these types of complex behaviors. And I think that your tradition and your work is better positioned to model complexity. And feel free to elaborate on chaos, which Carmen's also familiar with. But please describe for the audience, how would you attempt to model and describe the complex nature of that organic swelling or wellspring?
I'll be taking two approaches to it. I mean, in terms of modeling, the two approaches that make the most sense there, as top system dynamics, the approach that Ty is so good at and that I've developed with Minsky, but also multi-agent modeling. And this sort of stuff is one place where you would definitely want to do multi-agent modeling, because you have different agents with different concepts, different environments affecting their behavior, and they will interact in ways that you don't expect if you try to do a top-down model. And that's the sort of thing where sophisticated multi-agent modeling combined with scenario analysis, so you continue changing your environment and seeing how that changes what the multi-agent thing converges to. That'd be extremely useful. I'll give my favorite example of multi-agent modeling, which is accessible to most people. There's a program which I've used on occasions, I haven't used it for ages now, but called NetLogo. And NetLogo grew out of Logo, which is an attempt to teach object-oriented programming to children. Quite amusing. But what it had was you draw an area in which interactions occurred, and then you'd have rules about how agents who are located on one space in the rectangle interact with other agents and see what happened. And one of the simplest was in modeling a party. So you had about 20 or 30 groups which could form at a party, and you would have an inclination of the male and the female agents who are not to want to be in a group of females. And the intriguing was that it had even the slightest...
Let's just say, sorry, I'm going to interrupt, Steve.
Can you favor of majority? Yeah.
Can you say that again? The tin can went over your head there for a minute, and I think it was a really important explanation and point. So just repeat what you just said there. And
we've lost Steve again, sadly.
The superpower of freezing, my voice has frozen him. So
it's coming up. No. While we wait for Steve, I'll just tell you that. Oh, here he is.
Okay. So just to finish the story, the multi-agent model in NetLogo has an example called as a party, and having males and females at a party, forming up groups as if the males have a slight desire to be in a male majority group as opposed to a female majority group. And if it's even close to 51% preference for male, then what you get is 100% male groups and 100% female groups. So the only way you can actually get mixing in this situation is to have people be willing to be part of a minority. And what that tells you fundamentally is you want to bring about social cohesion in a diverse population, then what you have to do is get people to be comfortable to be a part of a minority. Now that's very much me. I'm very happy to be minority, and I'm a minority in Thai society when I go there. I've been a minority in African societies, and I'm happy about that. But if you are at all, I'd rather be more people like myself, then you get total segregation. you don't get a bit less mixing, you get total segregation. So that sort of multi-agent simulation, I think, would be extremely useful for an organization like the CIA that's trying to say what's going to happen out of these complex social interactions. And when you do it, of course, the bottom-up stuff you were talking about, Carmen, becomes far more important, because that often sets the milieu within which those decisions are made. And you could be trying to impose a top-down control. And if you're not linked into that bottom-up movement, which of course we're seeing in China right now with reactions to the lockdown, we saw with Iran over the execution of that woman, the pushback. If you don't have the population to some extent represented in your simulations, and if there's pushback within that population, the world is going to be a totally different place to what you model. And your interactions, if you're going without that knowledge, will be disastrous, probably the opposite of what you wish to achieve. And I think that's a large part of what I've seen as the history of the CIA over time.
Well, I would agree that a lot of times, a government will come up with a fantastic strategy and think that they're going to be pulling levers and the puppets will fall in line, and the strategy just doesn't work. And this fact you pointed out about how men and women in the model would mingle is a very phenomenon that I'm familiar with, and have thought about it a lot in terms of social dynamics, that really the tipping point to get a diametrically opposite result can be very, very slight. So, you know, when you're, for example, thinking, how close is society X to a revolution or some complete breakdown in order, and you may say, oh, well, only 30% of the U.S. population believes X, right? And thinking, oh, well, you're still far away, but maybe you're not, because the dynamic of it is quite different. There was a book that was published gazillions of years ago, and if I went down to my library, I could find my copy. But it was a study of a small town in Germany between the two world wars. It's not a big town at all. You've never heard of it. And someone had done a sociological study of how that town became a supporter of Hitler and the Nazi Party. And I always thought that would, and this is 15 years ago now. So I think today the technology and the approach and the algorithms would be a lot better. But I always thought it would be a cool idea to take all that information in that book and then try to model it, and then and see if you could get the model to do the same thing that actually happened in history, and then reverse engineer it and figure out what would have been the critical differences that would have led to a different outcome.
That's a very vast.
I don't have the math skills to do that. I'm a complete basic idiot on math. So it would have been someone else who would have to do that. But I always thought that would be, a really interesting idea, is to take some known moments of history and then find a situation where we have really fine grained detail on, and then work the model there to see what you can get.
Oh, that'd be a very intriguing use of the technology. I think I've just to give an example that I haven't done it yet. I've got two big jobs to work on right now, so I haven't had time to do this side one that I thought of. But I've seen lots of people saying that most of the people who've got COVID these days or getting ill have been vaccinated, which shows vaccination doesn't work. And there's a very simple system dynamics model that you can build, which I probably take me about 4 hours to build. I've imagined I tried doing it, where if you have a population which is vaccinated and therefore has lower susceptibility to the disease, and you run the simulation over time, then you're going to find ultimately most of the people getting the disease are going to have been vaccinated, because that's reduced this absolute total number of instances of severe illness. Yeah. And what people see though, well, the proportion's gone up. They don't realize the actual number's gone down. And that's right. That sort of lack of awareness is where a lot of stupidity comes from, I think.
Well, I do think that however we educate ourselves, we just don't do a good enough job at getting people to understand statistics and probability. And this, from this failure are born many conspiracy theories.
Yeah, very, very well put. Very well put. Yeah. So are you're no longer a CIA analyst? What are you now?
I am an independent person, and I do independent things. So I dabble, basically. I'm retired, and I dabble. The last public thing I did that people could easily find is I spoke. I did a presentation with a colleague at South by Southwest earlier this year.
Okay.
And I'm very interested in how we think. That's my main area of expertise, so to speak. People at the CIA tend to specialize on particular parts of the world. And as my career went on, I became much less interested in any particular part of the world and much more interested in what is good thinking, what is a good idea, how do we develop it, what is insight. I could go on. And so that's what I spent a lot of time writing on, talking on, and I do it basically as an amateur, which of course means, amateur is, the root is love. So it's when someone does something big out of love, that because they just love to do it. Which book? What is the book name?
I think you're referring to the book that you're about the populations and being able to,
I wish. I'd have to disappear for 5 minutes and go look at my library, because I don't. I don't organize my library because I like randomness, and I want to invite randomness into my life. So and also I'm slightly lazy, and that's also all good.
I can relate with that. Do you blame it on randomness or do you blame it on laziness? Well, they kind of go hand in hand when it's human nature, I suppose.
I think that with one I've just actually searched Rebels at Work, a handbook for leading change from within.
Yeah, that's the book that I co-wrote. And then the book on the sociology of a small town in Germany during the interwar period, that was a very, I'm sure that was somebody's PhD that got published, and I would really have to search to try to find it.
For that one.
Yeah, didn't find that one, but just the one I found, the Rebels at Work. Yeah. And my entire existence has been being a rebel at work. So it's and what had struck me, and this comes from an academic perspective, it's incredibly hard to shift a paradigm. A paradigm is a way of viewing the world. Okay, and that'll, like in the astronomy paradigm in astronomy used to be the Earth-centric, that the Earth is the center of the universe, and that lasted for 1,500 years, or actually more like 2,000 years.
That's
shifting that.
My favorite examples of things I like to say is that our ability to know is a function of our tools for knowing, and we forget this all the time. And of course, the Greeks, the Arabs, the Chinese, many societies developed tools for navigation. And these tools for navigations were also useful because they were navigating by the stars to kind of track what was going on in the sky. So that was advanced knowledge a little bit, but we didn't really get the big breakthrough until the Europeans started working and observing the planets, and that breakthrough was a result of the telescope. And so people figured out how to make telescopes. Galileo, how did he make his living? He was one of Italy's best telescope makers. So conventional wisdom is, I would say, is that wisdom that is derived from the current generation of tools for knowing.
That is beautifully put.
Tools, of course, can also include methods, right? And when we get smarter, because maybe a new technology is developed or there's a moment of insight, again, what is that really? I don't know. It's be fun to figure that out. How it happens neurologically. What is going on? That new method, new tool is what generates the new idea. And a lot of people, have a really hard time coming to grips with, they grew up with a generation of tools and they just can't adjust to them, to the new generation.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I've been doing in economics. So the tool in economics is equilibrium thinking, and that means you've got to use the tools of linear algebra fundamentally, and optimization. And they've stolen a bit from system dynamics in terms of optimization theory, but they're not at all in dynamics and complexity. In fact, all their tools actually rule out the possibility of complexity. They don't even, the whole idea that there can be an unstable equilibrium horrifies them. So they leave
right. And yet, chaos theory, at least as I understand it, is that that unstable equilibrium can be a very, productive place to be. Yeah,
the whole idea of equilibrium is desirable. Is a hangover from the, if you're going to balance a stick on another stick, it's desirable to reach the equilibrium. Otherwise, the stick falls over. But a living system being out of equilibrium is actually where creativity comes from, creativity and change and evolution. Yep. So the tools actually set up your mindset as well. And that's why, in my major focus in economics has been to build a set of tools that mean that the next generation can understand complexity and dynamics and non-equilibrium behavior and leave about this appalling hang up that the old tools give you, and believing equilibrium may exist a good thing.
Right. Yep.
I want to interrupt with one amazing book recommendation. This is from James Glick. This is, have you read it, Carmen?
No, but I just, like the title.
Yeah. Well, and Steve, have you read it? I mean, yes or no? I don't know. Test to see if you're still frozen.
Oh yeah.
This is a book that I heard about this author from Robert Sapolsky, and he's an endocrinologist, somebody that I've read and listened to a lot of his material. He read this book and he recommended it, and he said it was so good he started reading it immediately after he read it the first time.
Wow.
So James Glick is he's a really good author. I've read all of his books, but for someone who wants to learn more about chaos, I highly recommend this book from James Glick called Chaos, a national bestseller.
Yeah. May I make a recommendation for something for the audience and everyone to read? I think I can share my screen, correct?
Yep.
So I read this article last night. It's a good, 4,000 or 5,000 words, so it'll take you a little while. But I thought it was just so fantastic that I want to share it with people. And it's How to Speak Honeybee. And it's from, I'm not quite sure how you pronounce that. I don't know, Daniel or Steve, if you have an idea. Noma. But this, you read what the art, and then you read the next 3 paragraphs, and then you're just blown away. And basically, there's a lot of discussion here as to how, let's see, where am I? Am I still here? Because I stopped sharing and I don't know what happened.
Yeah.
I'm still here? Okay. But the our page responsive. Okay. Well, I'm gonna
raising
wait.
Up. No.
Yep.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's basically, thinking that we stand the planet we live on and the species we live here with, and we are it's just amazing, and things and that you have.
So how to speak honeybee.
How to speak honeybee, yes.
Okay, and
I found it. It's
Okay.
not a book, it's a website. Yeah.
It was excellent.
okay.
And
well,
I
we'll,
actually
we'll
think
see.
from your woods.
Is from where did you say?
Academic who wrote it is from your part of the woods.
Oh, okay.
I think
Interesting.
she's
Western
I
Canada.
think
So
she's
it's-
from somewhere in Canada, if not British Columbia.
Well, that's actually where the co-host is from as well. Both Tyrone and myself are actually from the Pacific Coast of Canada. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think you've got such an incredible ability to curate well-written work. I know I've approached a couple of the people that I first found from you, Carmen, and I've actually had them on my site.
Oh, nice.
And and so I recommend for listeners to look up these references, and we'll make sure that we put them in the YouTube description. So check out the YouTube descriptions post video, and we'll make sure that we put the material in there. We are coming across the top end of the hour. I don't know what happened to Steve. He must have been so disappointed with the quality of the show. He must have been really upset at talking with you. Yeah, he probably didn't like my shirt or didn't like Carmen's hoodie. I don't know what it was, but I want to really thank you, Carmen, for spending this hour with us. I hope you got something out of it, and it was really nice. Yeah, really nice to see you again, and I hope we can stay in touch periodically. For everybody that's listening, that's us signing out, and we'll say goodbye now, and we'll see you all next week.
I hope everyone has a great holiday.
And we did it again. Now, as I said, our last show was canceled after you appeared on it. So fingers crossed the executives don't do that again.
The more I read in the neoclassical thing, the more I just, I'm scratching my eyeballs out all the time.
The voice of God in the background.
Oh, geez. Once the coins get warm enough because of your body temperature in the winter, it actually keeps you moderate beer drinking in the evenings. Well, that's inspiring for a Saturday morning.